Jaws. This episode is about Jaws. Yes, not just the original, but also the other three, love 'em or hate 'em, including the third chapter in the third dimension. The original is a classic, of course, made by Steven Spielberg. It was one of the movies that started off the popular summertime blockbuster, and it was fun not just because of being scary, but also building suspense. Just like Spielberg's later film, Jurassic Park, it had a lot of good special effects, but it was also effectively written and edited to heighten that suspense. And even more so with Jaws, because they had less special effects to work with, no CGI at the time, and decent models, but they filmed them selectively so as to not give away too much of the mystique of this shark. It was made in 1975 and stars Roy Scheider, and he plays the police chief in this small town who has to go up against people who aren't taking the threat of the shark seriously. And eventually, with this seemingly incompatible group of men, they go to hunt this thing down. And again, a lot of the suspense was just due to the writing and editing. The shark isn't shown all that much, and when it is, you take notice. And it's funny, the first time he sees this shark, it caught me off guard, because I saw this when I was a kid, but I remembered basically what happened, but I got a few surprises here and there. It was just out of nowhere that shark shows up, and the way he walks backwards, that was so funny. But then, of course, it was also scary, and you didn't know how things were going to work themselves out, and a clever ending as well. They made a new 4K master of this. It looks great, straight from the 35mm negatives. And along with the origination of summer blockbusters at this time period in history came the proliferation of the sequel. So when studios have rights to something, they commission a sequel, whether there's a story or not, just to strike while the iron's hot and get more money out of it. Now, granted, there are some exceptions. For instance, the first two Superman movies. The second Superman movie was good because it wasn't commissioned at the last second once it became commercially successful. It was already in the works, and it was being made by the same guy that made the first one. I know it didn't finish being made by him, and it did get altered from what he wished, but that's a whole nother story. But basically, that's why Superman 2 was better. And you can see when it switched to commercial motivations and the studio taking over, well, that explains Superman 3. And probably the best example would be Star Wars. That escaped unscathed because, not only because it had a real artist at the helm, George Lucas, but also because he was business smart and kept control of it. He kept the sequel rights and had the final say. So therefore, the Star Wars movies themselves weren't excessively commercialized or lose their artistic integrity until 2015. That's another story. So yeah, Jaws 2, the sequel. It's not bad. I mean, the thing is, it's a movie that doesn't need to exist. It's a story that doesn't need to be told, and this is where it starts to stretch the bounds of believability. But it's not a bad movie either. It still has the same star, and it is entertaining. So Jaws 2 came out 3 years later in 1978, and then it was 5 years later in 1983 that we got Jaws 3, aka Jaws 3D. And this Blu-ray has the 3D version called a special feature, or a bonus feature, on the back. So obviously this was still during the film era, so not as good quality as modern digital 3D, but it was a little bit better than the 50s 3D era, because instead of having to use a twin camera rig and worry about synchronization, as well as twin projectors, which was even harder on a wide scale in theaters, they had a lens attachment for the camera as well as a lens attachment for the projector at theaters, which enabled single camera and single projector 3D. But it's not all positive. One downside of this is that it reduced the clarity of the film pretty severely. I mean, some shots look better than others, but like here in this example, you'll see that it's so soft. And often throughout the film, it has these color banding artifacts around people and objects, the way the light would reflect in that attachment. But regardless, this has got some really strong 3D. It starts right away with the opening titles coming at you, literally. And it's really fun to ogle these opening titles. It's really a lot of fun on a good 3D system without ghosting. If it works properly on your equipment, then it's going to look great. There's plenty of instances of objects coming at you deliberately, perfectly framed for it, whether it's a shark or a needle squirting liquid at you. Eye-popping underwater scenes with layers that lend themselves very well to 3D, floating in different areas of space such as fish and air bubbles. And because it's strong 3D, even distant shots have some depth to them. And of course, plenty of otherwise mundane shots that look just fine in 3D. And this movie reminded me not only of Jurassic Park, but also of Revenge of the Creature, the sequel to The Creature from the Black Lagoon that was also filmed in 3D. Takes place in this water park, and of course the chaos that ensues when the creature gets loose, with crowds running and everything. And this had a lot of optical effects in it, of course, before the days of computer editing, manually editing these multiple layers, printing out onto film, and then editing them into 3D as well. So there's a lot of generational loss in the way they physically put this together. But that's the only way they could do it at the time, and it's really interesting to watch how they not only edited the special effects in this optically, but also stereoscopically. But there's one big problem, and it's not so much on the film end, because virtually all vintage 3D films have to be tweaked by 3D experts to get an optimum result. You gotta, just like in my episode about 3D editing, you have to adjust the parallax. Even with a modern digital camcorder, it doesn't hurt to tweak it a little bit. Well, with old films, you have to tweak it a lot to get it right, sometimes on a scene-by-scene basis. And they did nothing of this sort with Jaws 3D, sad to say. This is definitely not one from the 3D film archive. They just copied that film strip straight to Blu-ray, basically. And I don't know if you noticed it, but in some of the screenshots I've already shown, even the ones that looked pretty good, there is slight vertical parallax, which is not good because we don't see vertical parallax. We only see horizontal, not vertical anomalies. So that can lead to eye strain. You might not even notice it at first, but there is one way to alleviate it, and it's to tilt in the direction of the misalignment, and that can make it look better. But considering that it sometimes changes from scene to scene, that can be annoying. And some shots are more extremely misaligned than others. It just varies so wildly throughout the film. Here's another example. You can see clearly how the guy's stripe on his pants and on the collar of his shirt are above each other, and the guy in the jet ski in the background, one layer is above the other. It's just ruined what could be a great 3D shot. And this was actually one of the few visually nice shots, even in 2D. This one of the sunset in the water, it would be even more beautiful in 3D if they had just tweaked that vertical parallax a little bit. So close yet so far. Who knows, maybe somebody who has time in their hands will do a fan edit and fix that parallax throughout the movie. That being said, Jaws 3 is still a must-have if you've got a 3D TV or projector. It's definitely worth it even with the errors. And then 4 years later, in 1987, last but not least, well, maybe last but least, Jaws 4, aka Jaws the Revenge. See that person there? Yeah, that's the wife of the guy from the first movie. In fact, the whole series is about their family. They were in the first two movies, and then their sons were in Jaws 3 as young adults, played by different actors, of course. And same with Jaws 4. The wife returns, her husband has died, and she is the main protagonist. Well, this easily got the worst reviews of all Jaws movies. Um, but again, it's not terrible. I mean, it's still interesting to watch. It was nice to see his wife's character brought back. And there is a scene in the film that I think inspired Finding Nemo. It is known that the Jaws shark from the first movie was named Bruce, and that's why they named the shark in Finding Nemo Bruce. That's widely known. However, Jaws the Revenge has a scene in it that really bears a resemblance to Finding Nemo, namely being chased through a submarine, uh, dealing with that locked door, even the shot of the shark swimming through the corridors of the submarine all looks very familiar. But otherwise, the shark effects just look cheaper than even the one from the 70s. Some of the dialogue is just like, who wrote this? Like, it's probably got one of the finest lines in cinema, where he says to the love interest, "I've always wanted to make love to an angry welder. I've dreamed of nothing else since I was a small boy." I mean, yeah. Besides just the general concept of the film stretching the bounds of believability beyond anything reasonable. But I think Jaws 3 already showed that it didn't take itself seriously anymore, so Jaws 4 already has a partial tongue-in-cheek, and it works that way. So yeah, those are the Jaws movies. I'll see you next time.